Hello everyone. Actually for the labs you don't need to keep your cams on, so you can close the cams. Any questions before we start? So I'm going to also talk a little about the project first. So Mohammed is going to grade and give feedback to your design stage 2, I guess within a couple of days. But for the other stages, so in the beginning we gave you a schedule, but that is flexible, so we are going to change a couple of dates there, so you will have enough time to do each of the stages, so no need to worry about those. And I will talk a little about what we are going to do in the implementation stages and also in the final demo of the project. So for implementation stage 1, what we want you to create the database according to your relational schema explanation. So this actually depends on design stage 2, but for the most part of it, actually, for example, for any of your simple entity sets are going to be directly transferred to a table. So Mustafa is asking, there is no quiz, I suppose, isn't it? So there is no quiz in the lab today. So if we plan to do a quiz, we are going to announce it in the labs. So for labs, they are going to be announced. No pop quizzes in the labs. So for implementation stage 1, you are going to create your tables in SQL Studio. So we want the database file only. So you are going to create your tables probably in SQL Studio. But it's actually not required. So as long as you deliver us the database file, you can also create it using create table statements using Python, for example. But preferred approach is going to be using SQL Studio because it's a visual approach, you have more control, etc. It's more manageable. So you are going to create the database file and populate the tables. So at least 5 entries per table. So for example, in there you might have a user table and you might have students and teachers, for example. In such cases, for the parent, you might have more entries. For example, I need, let's say, 5 students and 5 teachers. So in the parent user table, I will have 10 entries. And these are not going to be like real data. Yeet is also asking, do we fake the data? So as long as it is not like random in the sense of the letters. For example, if it's a name, just write a name there instead of like random letters with numbers. But this data does not have to be real, so there should not be a real person with the given information. Of course, don't write your credit card numbers, for example, if you have such attributes, etc. So for these entries, just come up with some meaningful values, because you are going to actually use these entries while you are showcasing the database in the final demo. For example, you are going to log in as one of the users. So actually, it helps to keep the password simple. For example, you are going to show us that you are able to log in as one of the users, and if the password is too long, you need to look it up in different pages, you need to check it, correct it. It becomes harder in the demo. So actually, if you have some passwords, etc., try to keep them simple. But at the same time, for other types of entries, for example, if it is the name of the person, like instead of the random numbers or letters, it is more meaningful to have a real name there. And then this is going to be just a database file with some entries. So you don't need to actually write the SQL code, or you don't need to come up with queries at this stage. Then we have implementation stage 2. And remember, for each of your topics, we gave you 3 scenarios. And actually in this lab, we are going to look at how we can implement similar scenarios using our student and course database. So if you remember in lab 2, we had an ER diagram. In that ER diagram, we had like users, teachers, students. So teachers were advisors of students. We had courses. Students were able to enroll into courses. And these 3 scenarios are actually very similar to what you have in the functional requirements document. So we are going to look at these scenarios and see how we can implement them. And by doing so, we will see a more complicated or a more complete example of using a Python code for like implementing our database system. And for implementation stage 2, what you need to do is choose one scenario. So you are given 3 scenarios. So out of these 3 scenarios, we want you to choose one of them first for this stage and implement it using Python. And of course, you will have the graphical user interface. So we learned PySimple GUI in the labs. So this is the preferred one. We suggest you to use it, but you can use any other interface, any other API as well. So if you know, for example, a replacement for PySimple GUI library, you can use that as well. So that's okay for us. So implement it using Python plus some user interface. And what you need to upload is going to be the Python file. And the Python file could be like IPYNB, or it could be a simple py Python document, plus the DB file that you have from implementation stage 1, because maybe you did some changes, maybe for the examples you entered more data, etc. You don't have to enter any more data, but let's say this is the most recent version of the database, so you are going to like upload it as well in implementation stage 2. But actually we also want you to showcase what you how you like follow the scenario. So for that, I'm going to show an example today, but we also want you to upload a video file. So we will have more concrete instructions on that, but this is going to like following the scenario. So for example, while we are grading it, we actually are going to look at this video file. Normally what we do was we had, so let me open up the schedule here for the labs. Normally what we have is we have like separate weeks for showing the implementation stages, but for the online courses, like actually if you all come and try to like show it one by one, it's harder to manage. And actually this term Mohammed is not available in our both of the lab hours. So what we want you to is to showcase the database you have, the application of the database, and you are going to record a video of it, and I'm going to actually show an example of it, how to do that. So you are going to, for example, in the scenario, let me open up these scenarios actually, let's look at them. So for the first one, so I'm going to actually copy these and like put it them into a notepad, because you might like look at them side by side. So for example, we need to log in as a teacher, list courses that are taught by this teacher, choose one teacher, list students enrolled in the chosen course. So this was actually, this should be the choose one course that I was going to fix it. So this is the given scenario, and we would like to show how to use it in our database. We are going to like choose some example users, log in as them, and maybe list courses. If we are showing any error messages, we are going to showcase them in the video file, so that when we are looking at your implementation for implementation stage 2, we are going to first look at the video, because if we were to go into the database and directly try to use it, maybe there is some functionality that you implemented but we may miss it. So the purpose of the video is that you showcase everything, we don't miss anything. So let me come back to here. So for implementation stage 2, this is it, one scenario, and for the final demo it's going to be all 3 scenarios, similar to what you have in implementation stage 2, but this time all 3 scenarios. So you already show one of them. If you make any changes, you can show it again. Maybe you fixed, corrected something, etc. But in the final demo, if you have shown one of the scenarios and if it did not change, you don't need to show it again. But for this one, we are going to make meetings with individual groups. So meeting as a group. And we are going to put a schedule on Moodle so that you may reserve a time slot that's available to you. And we expect you to come as a group, so all members should be there. As long as they are continuing the project, because sometimes some people withdraw the course, but they can also still continue to the project, and in such cases we would like to know that who is continuing, who is not. So that's required for all members to come, so you should manage it according to the times of your members as well. Don't worry about that, we will have lots of different slots for days, etc., and you will have enough time for all of these stages. And in the final demo, one person could go through the scenario, could open up on his system and show it to us. So not every member has to talk, but just be prepared. For example, sometimes some people come late, etc. You should be able to, for any person, should be able to open up the application, show what we can do there. So actually what we are going to grade is going to depend on the functionality more. So we are not going to look at your code. So unless you have some problem, let's say, and you would like to show it to us. So now let's look at how we can come up with a design for our different windows. Because in the scenarios, what you have is multiple things, right? And there are several different ways of doing the same thing. And since you are going to do it as a group, you should be able to separate it or divide it into meaningful pieces so that each of you can work on some of the tasks. For example, for the scenario we have, this first one says that login as a teacher. So teacher is one of our user types. And one functionality we need to do is to log in. And then list courses that are taught by this teacher. So we have the functionality, lists courses. And actually, I'm trying to find these words so that each of them could be implemented as a function in Python. So choose one course. So this is like a parameter to this function, right? For the parameter, I have a chosen course, and for this chosen course what I want to do is list students enrolled in this chosen course. So this is list students in, and my parameter is a chosen course. Maybe I get the primary key of a course and I would like to show the students that are in this course or enrolled in this course. And in the scenarios, so sometimes we say list. So while listing, you should like choose some meaningful attributes to list. For example, in here we are listing the students, and what I need to show is actually maybe I can show the ID of a student, maybe I can show name and surname of a student. So these you decide them, but they should be like meaningful. If you just list them according to their IDs, and if a teacher is going to choose a student, for example, we expect the names to be there, right? Just looking at the IDs, it's hard to choose a student, so you should include like enough fields. But I don't need to show the password of a student, right? Actually, I should not show the password of the student while I'm listing a student. And maybe I can show the grade of a student as well while listing a student. So you should also consider while listing which attributes you would like to project. So it says choose a student and update the grade of the chosen student. So now a different functionality, what I need to do is to update the grade of a student. And for that, actually, I need a new grade parameter. And actually, which student I would like to update the grade. So I also need the student's ID, SID. And for which course I need to update it. I also need the course code, right? So if you come up with the parameters needed for each of these functions, then you can coordinate easily while doing different functionalities. So then I need to insert a new student where the advisor is assigned as the teacher that will log in as. So insert new student. Actually, this requires like multiple attributes, right? For a new student, what I need. So those attributes are going to be there. So these are my functions. And I need to like relate these functions with some of my buttons in the windows. So I will have some windows, not the operating system, but the windows that we have in PySimple GUI. So for example, while welcoming the user, I need some first login page, right? In this login page, actually, I need some input areas. For example, I need the name of the user, I need the so according to the information that we decide, this can be, for example, the ID plus the password as well. So with which information I need to log in. Maybe I need to use ID and the password. Maybe it could be name, surname, and password, etc. So these are decided according to your database attributes. For example, the table attributes, which attributes you have, which are meaningful to use for a login scenario. And then from this login window, actually, we will have another page for the teacher, right? And if I try to put all this functionality onto the same window, it is going to look crowded. So therefore, most of the time we keep a teacher menu, for example, and from this menu, we can have separate pages for example, grade option. So we would like to grade a student. So update grades could be related to this. And also, so this list students and list courses are somehow related to this scenario. But inserting a new student does not have anything to do with these items, with these functions. So to insert a new student, so this is like the new student page, I can do this functionality on that separate page. So these can be separate as well. For example, I can have one page for updating grade and one page for listing courses and listing students that are in a course. But that's something we leave it to you. So as long as it's user friendly, that's okay. Like you can also, if you manage, you can keep them all in the same window as well. But if it gets so crowded, it can be hard to test as well. So you are going to implement it and test it. So if it is too crowded, it could be hard for you as well. So it is better to have like meaningful little windows that are focusing on a bunch of functions. And we also have some navigation, right? So in the login window, I'm going to click on a button. If I'm a teacher, this is going to open up the teacher menu. And if I want to go back, to log in as a different user, I should be able to. So in the teacher menu, we expect a go back or log out button as well. So from the teacher menu, we go to the grading page, for example, and from here, we would like to be able to go back as well. So while you are designing these different windows or pages, you should be careful about to keep those go back functionality as well. And while going back, we should go back to the meaningful areas. For example, from the grading page, maybe we also need to have a menu for the student, for example, student menus. And from the grading page, I should not be going into the student menu, for example, because I log in as a teacher. So for each of these functionality, we expect to have some windows. And let's look at the other scenarios. It says login as a student, list courses of this student with their grades, list all available courses, choose one course to enroll in. So from the student menu, what I can have is a course page. And in this course page, I can show the courses that I'm taking, and I can have a field to show the available courses, and I can choose one course to enroll in it. And the third scenario says login as a user. So teacher and student both are users. So actually, we are going into the same page from these two users, and we would like to, on this page, show messages that are sent to this user. We are going to list all users, and from this list, we are going to choose one user to send a message to. So the date of the new message should be today. It's like an additional information, but we also have a message page, and we should be able to go to this message page from the student menu and from the teacher menu. And of course, if we are coming from the teacher menu, when we go back, we should be able to go to the teacher menu and not to the student menu, and vice versa for a student login information. So from here, we actually need to pass a bunch of attributes from different windows. So for example, while we are logging in, we get the ID of a user. We check whether this is an existing user or not. If it's an existing user, we would like to be able to use this ID information in different windows for different functionalities. For example, while inserting this student's advisor should be assigned as the teacher that we log in as. So I need to know this ID in a different window. So for them, we are going to use global variables. So ID of the login user is going to be kept as a global variable. And in some cases, among different windows, we need to pass different information that could be among different functions as well. Sometimes we are going to require global variables. So coming back to our code. So at the beginning, we have a simple code to show us all the existing users in this database so that we are able to log in as different kinds of users. And I'm going to actually first run this code and show it how it functions. Then we are going to look a bunch of new or important areas. So I'm going to run it. So it's here. I'm going to open it up. So this is our login window. And now what I'm going to do is actually very similar to what you are going to do for implementation stage 2 while recording the video. So if we have some success or error messages, I should be showing them. So in the video, you are going to of course, record the screen, and there should be some voiceover explaining what's going on. So for example, let's start. So we have our login window. We would like to log in as one of the users. But if the user leaves the ID field empty, if I try to log in, it's going to say that, okay, ID cannot be empty. So let me write some ID, and then I need to have the password as well. I enter some password there, but the ID and password combination that I entered is wrong. So this is showing us the error messages. Now log in as Josh, for example, one of the teachers. ID is 1 and the password is A12. So if I click on the login button, this time it's going to recognize us as Josh. And Josh is a teacher account, so it also shows that this is a teacher. So I'm going to click on OK button to go into the teacher menu. So on the teacher menu, we have three different navigation buttons. So let me also show the scenario. Let's say I'm following the first scenario now. We logged in as a teacher account, and now we would like to list courses that are taught by this teacher. So we decided that this grading option and showing the courses is going to be on the same page, on the same window. So I'm going to click on the grade students. So this is our window here. And for this teacher, the courses are listed in this combo. So for example, for the math course, if I choose the math course, this first one is the course code and the second one is the description of the code. And then I'm going to list the students that are taking this course or enrolled into this course. So I'm showing the ID, name, surname, and the grade for that student. So if that student is not graded, it's going to say none for that student. For example, let's update the grade of Diane to some value. So Diane is now selected. Let me also go back and show the errors. So grade window, if I don't choose any course and try to list the students, it's going to say, okay, first choose a course. If I, for example, don't choose any student and try to update the grade, it's going to say, okay, please choose a student first. Let's choose Diane. If I click on update, it's going to say that, okay, please enter a grade. So my program is not crashing, right? I'm finding the missing fields and reporting it to the user. So that instead of a crash, instead of any error on the Python side, we actually display some message giving information to the user about what the user should do. So now let's enter something in the grade field, for example. Then it's going to say it should be numeric. What I write here should be numeric. So I'm going to write some numeric value, and this time it's going to complain that it should be in 0-100 range. So let me write a valid grade here. When I click on update grade, now it's giving me a success message. So it may also change the database but not report it to me. Then I would wonder what's happening, right? It's better to give information to the user. So it's successfully set grade to 70. And whenever I click on OK, it's going to refresh this list so that Diane now has the grade 70. Maybe I did a mistake. Let's increase the grade. So those I'm able to do it. So let me, for example, go to another course, list the students in that course. So these have different grades. So maybe let me go to biology. So only Martin is taking biology. Let's update the grades, etc. Now for this scenario, I also need to insert a new student. And to do that, I have a different window. So insert new student window. And in here, actually, for a new student, we need the ID. We need the password as well, right? We sometimes can generate required attributes within the code, for example. For ID, if I were to have some ID field here, then the user will be able to type any ID. Then I need to check whether that ID exists or not. And maybe we have so much users that we are not going to be able to find a valid ID for a new user that easy. So for example, if I have millions of users, then for each of these users, how should I determine the ID? Actually, one simple thing, we can just look at the maximum ID in our table and increment it by 1 so that it's going to be a valid ID for a new user. And for the password, so in this scenario, the teacher is creating the student accounts, and maybe we have a list of hundreds of students. We would like to just put the information and we would like to generate some password for them automatically in the code. So this is actually doing that. So I'm going to show it up in the code as well. But for this new student, let's maybe this is ID and for the scholarship, let me write some number as well, and I'm going to insert this student, and it's going to show me the message saying that, okay, we successfully inserted the student, but for this student, the ID is 17, and the password is 1B33A. So I'm going to maybe send this information to the student as an email, etc., or I'm going to say it to the student. But later on, we clear these input fields. So for example, if I try to insert without writing the name, it's going to say name cannot be empty. So let's write something, and for the surname it cannot be empty as well. And for the scholarship, although in the database we said that scholarship is not required, so it doesn't have the not null constraint, in the application side we might have different decisions. So if it is going to be none, for example, just write 0 for no scholarship. So this is something we come up with while we are writing the Python code. So this is like something you decide. So whether you should be able to leave this as empty or not. So you are going to like make some checks, some if-else statements. And for example, if the scholarship is not given, not written, you can say that, okay, for this one, just keep it the null value. So this is something you are going to decide in the code. But for this application, we decided that, okay, it has to be in there, even when it is 0. So let's keep it 0 for this new student. And this new student is inserted with a new ID and a different random password. So some of the passwords could be same, but to keep it simple, we included like a small set of letters, and it is going to make different combinations of those letters. So I'm going to show the code for that. But now let me return back to the menu, and let's go to this third functionality or third scenario, login as a user. So we already logged in as one of the users. We are a teacher user. We would like to show messages sent to this user. So I'm going to go to the message board, and for my messages, one possibility was to use a list box, and in that list box I could also contain the content of the message. But in this application we decided that instead of that, let's only show the headers of those messages. So these are the name, surname of the sender plus the date. And in this database, if you remember, a user can send a message to another user on the same date only once. So if I would like to send a message to Cody, for example, I can do it today, but today I cannot send another message. I need to do it tomorrow. So this is not very a realistic scenario, but to showcase that in a relationships table as well, we can have such a primary key selection. We are doing that. So the date only contains the day information, not the hour. So for example, from this message list, I can choose one of the messages, and if I click on the show message, it's going to give me a pop-up window containing the content of that message. So I can choose one other message, so it shows that, etc. And in here, on the left side, these are actually order numbers. So these are not some values from the attributes of the tables that we have for the send entity set or the send table. So in the send table, what we have is the sender's ID, receiver's ID, and the date, and the message content. We don't have any numbering there, but while listing these, we decided to include order numbers so that whenever we choose one of them, we will be able to find out the message content easily. So this other part is for sending messages. So if I just click, it is going to say that choose a receiver first. So I need to choose a receiver. So in the system, to send a message, I need to either know the ID of the receiver, or I can choose it, right? So the receiver and the sender IDs are actually foreign keys. And if you have some foreign keys in the tables, if you want the user to write the foreign key directly, then you should be careful, right? So this is some decision. I can have just an input field and ask the user to write the ID directly there. But for example, in this case, showing the possible users as a list is more user-friendly. And in the final demo, actually, if your program is more user-friendly, it's going to be better for you. We would like to write an application that's user-friendly. So for all of the functionality that we have here, we can have just input fields. We can ask the user to type everything, but that's going to be not very user friendly. So as a result, in this place, since it is suitable, we are actually listing the users, and in here actually we are not showing the ID of the user. These are again order numbers, and order numbers are there because it makes our job easier without showing the ID. For example, there could be multiple Charlene Scotts, right? Name is not unique, surname is not unique, but the primary key of the user table is unique. But actually in here we don't want to expose the IDs of the users. Since these are starting from 1, actually the user may relate or find out about the IDs of these users. But for example, for Charlene, the ID is actually 2, etc. Since we logged in as Josh, 1 is not used here, so we look at all the remaining users after Josh. But in here, we decided that maybe we don't want to expose the IDs of the users while sending a message. So let me choose one receiver. I need to write a message here. So let me write hey, for example, in here. I'm going to send this message. It says successfully sent, and the message is cleared. And if I try to send another message to Charlene today, it's going to complain that you already sent a message today to Charlene. But I can send the new message to some other user, so that's successfully sent. So actually let me log out and log in as Charlene now, and the password is B21. If I log in as Charlene, if I go to the message board in here, I'm going to see 2 messages from Josh Chambers, and the second one is actually on today. I should make this list box larger, but it says hey. So if I look at the other message, it says let's check that. So I can reply back to Josh, for example, in here with like 1, 2, 3. And if I were to like log in back as Josh, and I will be able to see his message. So in the like implementation stage 2, like just a shorter version of it, you are going to record a video. So this is the new message by Charlene Scott. So Charlene sent me a message on a different day as well. So if this list box was larger, you will be able to see that. And now for the other scenario, it's for a student user. We would like to log in as one of the students. For example, let me log in as Nicholas, so 6 and R2D2, and I'm showing that this is a student user, and in here we still have the message box. So we show that for a teacher account, this is actually going into the same window. So let me show the one for the courses. So we would like to list courses of the student with their grades. So I'm going into the my courses, and these are the courses for the students. These are the enrolled courses for the students. We are showing the grade next to the course, for example, in here, and we have a field for enrolling into a new course. So we have the available courses here. If I choose one of them and click on enroll, it says successfully enrolled into programming. So it adds programming into here, and if I check the available courses, it doesn't contain the programming here no longer, because like we won't be able to enroll into it a second time. So this is something what you are going to do in the implementation stage 2 and also in the demo. And now we are going to look into some parts, because some parts are new, but some parts are like we did already. We did similar things in the last lab, and in here this is a more complete program, right? Because of that, it has more lines of code. And if you are using the Jupyter notebook to see the line numbers, what you need to do is to go through view, and you have the toggle line numbers there. So because when you have a syntax error, it shows up the line number, but if you don't have the line numbers open, it's hard to find the line that contains the error. So in this in this Python code, we decided to group the window functions together. So these functions are for creating each of those windows. So we have some global variables to keep them during the run of the program. At the beginning, we need to connect to the database, so you require lab6db file. So for each of those files, they are available on the lab homepage. So we have the database, we have the Jupyter Notebook file, and there is the py version of it. But as I always, we need to actually for this one, it's actually you can run it as a whole Python file. Actually, what we have is just 2 cells. So this first cell is just listing the users, but then the rest of the code is just 1 cell. So you can actually run it as a py file directly as well for this one. We have window functions. So when we call one of these functions, it's going to create the window for that, and it's going to return that window. So we already did similar things. But in this case, we have more windows, right? We have a login window, we have the teachers menu, we have the students menu. And for example, we have the window for enrolling into a course, or this also shows the current courses of the students, right? When we log in as a student, on this window, we list the current courses of the student. We also list the available courses, and the student can choose one course and enroll into that course. So for this window, we actually need to know some information from the database. So while creating a window, sometimes you need to access the database. For example, in here, we would like to find the courses that this student is enrolled into. So for that, we need the enrolled table and also the course table, because we would like to also show the description of the course, and the description of the course is in the course table, but the enrolled information is in the enrolled table. So we need to join these 2 tables, and we are going to only show the ones where SID is equal to this login user ID. So since we are keeping this as a global variable within this function, this is the first instance of login user ID. We are not setting the value of it, we are just using the value of it, right? So it is going to act as the global variable. So whenever I write login user ID, it's actually this global variable login user ID. And at this stage of login, I'm going to record it, and throughout the program, we are going to use that same login user ID for that user. We need to also get the available courses for the student, and I would like to show the courses, and I decided that also let's show the teacher's name and surname that's instructing that course. So in the course table, we have the instructor TID, and it's a foreign key to the teacher table. So I could have also include the teacher table here and join it with, so I can join course to teacher and teacher to user. But since we are using the same IDs, I can bypass teacher table as well. So we just bypass teacher table here. We directly join course and user. And I would like to only show the courses that course code is not among the set of course code that I am enrolled into. So if we look at the subquery, this is the course codes that I'm enrolled into, because I have this SID should match with the login user ID for the student user. And I'm only showing the course codes that are not in this set. And I'm joining them with the user table to show the name and surname of the teacher, as well as the course code and the description. So for these information, we have lists, and I append the rows to the lists. And then my layout is like this. We have a list box for the courses that I'm currently enrolled into. I pass the courses table to that. And I also have this available courses. This is a combo. I'm going to choose one of the items at a time. It's not really for listing them. It's more like choose one of them. And then for the window grades, what we have is, so this is the one where we list the courses of this teacher. And without choosing a course, we are actually not listing the students. So at the top, I have a combo So I pass the courses of the student. So courses is a list. I fill it with the results of this query. So this query finds the course code and description where instructor TID is equal to the login user's ID. And I pass to this combo. But for the list box, I actually pass an empty tuple. So this list box is going to start empty. And I'm going to fill it up according to the course that is selected. So the user is going to choose a course, and for that course I would like to list the students. For the grade, I have this input, I have this update grade button as well. So for the new student, we have a bunch of input fields so to insert a new student. And then we have the message window, and in message window we actually need to map order numbers to the message content, and I also need to do a similar thing for the user IDs. So if you remember, we decided that, let me actually show it again. So this was window message. So in here we decided that for messages we have order numbers, for receivers we have order numbers. These are not actual attributes in the tables, so these are decided in the application. So if I were to log in as a different user, these order numbers will still start from 1, but they will have different matches to different attributes. So as a result, we actually need to be able to get the content and the user IDs from a different function. So that's why these are declared as global. So let me first show what we are doing here. We have messages, a list of messages as a list of contents. So we have this query from the send table. We join it with the user table so that we have the name and surname of the user as well. But for the ones that have a matching receiver ID, or let me say it like that, for the values in here, the receiver ID should be equal to the login user's ID. So these messages are sent to me. I know that because the receiver ID is my ID. So I get these values, but I have an order number variable starting from 1. So for this first order number variable, for this message, I append the order number as well. I put the name, surname, and date to messages list, but I put the content into the content list. So I'm keeping two information in different lists. So I actually get this information from just one SQL query, but I separate the attributes. I keep the content in a different list. Why? Because I decided that let's not show the content in the list box, and whenever user chooses some value item from the list box, I'm going to display the content in a different window. And because of that, we actually need to know the order numbers, because actually this information is also enough. So if I know the date and also the sender's ID, actually I'm not showing the sender's ID, right? So one reason for having the order number is that I'm not showing the sender's ID. If I were to show the sender's ID here, then it's going to be like get the sender's ID, receiver's ID, and the dates, and find the message for that tuple. But instead we kept order numbers, and if I know the order number of a selected message, then I directly know the content, because we are increasing the order numbers one by one. So the order number is going to be actually unique. So it's similar to a primary key, but we just invent it in the application, and once we run it, like we are using it for like one task here. And similarly, for listing the users, we do a similar thing. We execute a query, we get the ID, name, surname from the users, but we have a condition. I should not list myself, so the ID should be different than login user ID. We have the users list, and we have the user IDs list. So in the user list, we append the order number, and whenever I need the ID of the user, I have it in a different list. And these lists for the content and the user IDs, I'm going to use them in a different function. So this function is just to create the window. So that's why the content and user IDs are global. So now let's give a 10 minutes break and we will continue at 2:30. If you have any questions, you can ask. Any questions before we start? So now in this program, what we are going to achieve is a more realistic example for what you are going to do for the project. And in most, or let me say it like that, in the project, you have a bunch of scenarios, and these scenarios is going to involve interacting with different windows. We are going to log in as different users. We are going to use some different functionality for each different kind of user, and that requires a larger amount of code. And to be able to manage it easily, it helps to have different functions. So you are doing this as a group project, right? Because of that, you might like divide some functions among members, and one member could perhaps be involved with the more of the design of it, which function is called when, how to communicate from different windows, etc. So at the end, for this like whole, so for this large code, it is better, it's more helpful to start with some simple design. We don't require you to like write a design document, etc. You are going to just deliver the program as long as it's functional. We are not going to look at your code. So you may like omit all the functions. You can like just write the code without using any function, etc. But it is helpful to have functions, and in the case when it's done by multiple people, it helps for communication. So for example, I might say to one member, okay, you should have you should create a window for showing and sending messages. I'm going to give you the login user ID. So login user ID will be available to you, but you need to find the other data within this window, within this function, for example. So this function is actually doing that. We construct a layout, so we create the window, but in this window we would like to display the messages of this user. So I just have the login user ID in this function, and I need to use some SQL query to get the message content, etc. So this is constructing the message window. But in the message window, I actually have some buttons. So I have the return to main button. This is going to navigate to the main window. But I also have this send message button. I also have this show message button. So these are also implemented as different functions. And for these two functions, I actually need to pass some information. So to show a message, what I need, so let me actually look at that show message function. To show a message, what I need is going to be the index of the content. So for the message content, it's already available actually while I'm constructing that window. So if we go back to that part here, so while getting the messages, we decided to keep the content on a different list, and that list is actually a global variable. So I have a global list that contains the messages of this user. So when a message is selected, I'm going to get its order number. So the first index is the order number, and from this order number I can find the index of the content. I need to just decrease it by 1 because index numbers start from 0, order numbers start from 1, but this order number acts like an index to the content list box. So if I go back into my show message button or the function, so this function shows the message. It receives the values as a parameter because if you remember, within our loop, maybe it's better to look at our loop first. So we open the first window at the beginning, we have our loop going on, and Whenever the user clicks on some button, what we get is the event and the values. So values contain any of the values that user selects from the layout or types into any input field. Event is the name of the button. So if we click on the login button, for example, we call the button login function. We pass the values to here so that that button can use it. We can also keep it as a global variable, and within that button we can use it directly. But we decided that, okay, let's just pass the values. For example, if we were to click on the message board button, then we are closing the current window, whatever it is. We just open a new window for the message window, and the function is doing that actually. We need to like set this window parameter so that we will be able to close it later on. And if I look at the show message, this is calling the button show message with the values parameter. So the values parameter actually contains the chosen message line. So that line has the order number, name and surname of the sender, and also the date. So the order number of it is in the first index, like index 0. And I get the chosen values. If nothing is selected there, if the length of the chosen is 0, this is because this is a list box. Remember, list box, whenever you choose something from the list box, it returns a list of items. Because although the default option for a list box just enables to choose one line from it, by using a different setting, you can choose multiple lines in a list box. Because of that, the list box actually returns a list of values. So the first index 0 is because of that. So from this chosen, if the length is 0, that means nothing is selected. But if it is not 0, then that means at least something is selected. Since we are using the default options, it's going to actually be just one value, just one row is going to be chosen. And from this chosen, we say that, okay, for the first item that is selected, we know that there is only going to be one item selected, but we need to have it because it's a list of tuples. So the first index, the index 0, contains the order number. We get the order number and decrease it by 1 to get the index, and we find the content in this index. It is going to be a string. We just pass that string to the pop-up function, which displays a pop-up window. So this is the functionality whenever we click on the show message button. We also have a button to send a message. So this is kind of similar in the way that in here, content lists, we are using the global variable. And whenever we click on the button send message, we actually use the user ID. So this user ID is also the global variable, the global list. And from that list, we find the ID of the user. So from the order number, we find the ID of the user in that button. So I'm showing this because while we create the message window, content and user IDs are global lists. So that was to summarize that. So let me also look at the other functions. Actually, sorry about that. This window was the last window we had, and now we are into functions, and we looked into the teachers windows. So let me actually continue from where we left. So we just looked at the button show message here, and let's just continue with button send message. So we require one receiver to be selected. If that's not selected, we display a message. So in most of our functions, we start with that. So we check whether the information required is given or not. So if it is not given, we just display a pop-up window to say to the user that what's needed. And then this area is for finding the receiver ID, because we are using the order numbers instead of showing the user ID directly. Then we get the text message. So it's an input. So the key of the input was message text. We get the value of it. If it is not empty, then we are going to First, check whether we sent a message to this receiver on this date or not. So I'm getting the today's date, so we had an example for it in the last lab. And I would like to execute this query. So the sender ID is going to be login user ID. The receiver ID is going to be this receiver ID that I find out for the selected user. And the date should be equal to today's date. So I have these three parameters. Remember to give it as a tuple to the execute function, and it's going to replace each of these question marks so that whenever I fetch one of the results, so I expect one entry there. So whether it's empty or not, that's I'm going to check. So I try to just fetch one entry. So I don't expect multiple rows from this query. So that's what I'm saying. As a result, I just fetch one entry. That's enough. But if it is none, it means that I did not send a message to this receiver on this date. So I will be able to actually send a message. That means if the row is none, I'm going to do that. If it is not none, means that we already sent a message to this receiver on this date. So we are going to show an error message in that case. But if we are sending the message, that means that we would like to insert something into the send table. And what we are inserting is going to be the ID of the sender, which is me, the login user ID. Then the receiver's ID, so receiver ID is there. We pass the message text, we got it from this input area. So the message text, we got it from user. And we also pass today's date, which we calculated using datetime function. After that, we would like to clear the message text. So for that, we are able to reach the window. Using the element function, we give the key of the message text. And then we update its value to contain the empty string. Then we display a message to the user. So displaying messages to the user is important because otherwise you are clicking on some buttons and you are not sure whether it succeeded or not. So it's more user-friendly to inform the user about the stages that are happening. So let's look at some other functions now. So this is for the login button, and maybe this is kind of new. We made a login scenario before, but in here we also would like to keep the login user type. So we have different types of users. We have the user table containing the ID and the password, name and surname is also there. But then we have different tables, different child tables for student and teachers. And if you remember, if some user is a teacher, I also need to insert that user's ID into the teachers table. If that user is a student, I need to have the ID in the student table. So in this button login functionality, we need to set the global variables, right? We said that, okay, login user ID, these are going to be some global variables. But if we are setting the value within a function, then we need to explicitly say that this is the global one. Otherwise, it will be kept as a local variable. So whenever I find the user, for example, I set login user type here. For example, whenever I decide that, okay, this is an existing user with that ID, I set login user's ID to some value from the query, etc. But the important thing is that if I'm setting its value, and if it should be the global one, then I need to explicitly say that I'm using the global version. Otherwise, it will be local and we will not be able to reach that value from a different function. So I also keep the window as global because I need to reach the global version of it because I'm setting its value to something else in some parts of my code. If I'm setting it into something else, and if I'm not explicitly saying that it's the global version, it will keep a local version of it, then I will not be able to close this window outside my function. So the global and local thing, you need to be careful about those. If you are going to need that value in a different function, you need to explicitly say that that's the global one in the beginning of the function. So what this does is we are getting the ID and the password. They cannot be empty. We are displaying messages if they are empty. If they are not empty, What we need to do is first we need to check whether this is a valid user or not. So I'm first executing this query. I'm trying to find a matching user with the given ID and the password. So ID and password should match at the same time so that I will be able to log in as this user. If the row is none, meaning that we are not able to find an entry in the user table with the given ID and password combination, then we are going to say, okay, ID or password is wrong. Which one, I'm not sure, but something is wrong. This is not a valid user. But if it is not none, then that means that we are able to find that user. So since we find that user, now I'm going to keep its login user ID. So I'm projecting the ID for this user. I'm going to keep that login user ID in this variable. I'm going to also keep the username for this user, because I'm going to, for example, in some other window, maybe I'm going to display this name. So if I need some information about this user in a different window, then these are my global variables that I keep. Then I would like to find out which type of user this login user ID belongs to. So to do that, I'm going to do two checks, right? If you remember, we decided to merge student table with the advisor table in lab 2. Therefore, the name of this table is actually student with advisor. But in your project, just keep the simple short names. So this was just for the example. We named it like this. And like this is our student. It also contains the advisor information. The table name is therefore a little longer, but in your projects, just keep the simple shorter names. We try to find out whether we have such a student that matches this UID. So that UID is actually coming from this UID that we got from the user. But I actually know that this login user ID is also the same thing. So in here, it's going to be equal to writing login user ID. So these are equivalent. I can use the one that I get from the database or the one that I get from the input fields. So they contain the same thing. I know that because this query actually succeeded. I'm able to find a matching user with the given ID, which is UID. So let's just keep it as UID. The two of them are equivalent. We fetch one record from this query result, and if it is none, so if the row student is none, that means only that this is not a student. I need to still check whether this is a teacher or not. In this design, there are only two types of users, teachers and students, but in the projects, most of the time you have three different kinds of users. And you need to first check whether this is a student or not, whether this is a teacher or not, whether this is a staff member or not, for example. And you need to do like multiple checks. If it is not a student, I'm not directly saying that that's a teacher. I need to still look at the teacher table. So this is not a student, let's check the teacher table. But if it's a student, so if row student is not none, then I'm into this part. In this else part, I'm sure that this is a student. So I'm setting the login user type to student. I display a pop-up message saying, okay, welcome, then the username, and then I'm writing student to say that this is a student account. I close this window and I open the window for a student. But if it is not a student, then I need to check whether this is a teacher or not. So this query is very similar to the previous one. This time it is from the teacher table. I need to find the matching ID where the TID of the teacher equals to this given UID. And if it is none, then this means this is actually not a student and not a teacher. So that is kind of problematic for this database. So in the ER diagram on the database side, there is no way to like ensure that a user will be in a teacher table or in the student table. So in the application side, you can make sure. So for example, whenever you create a user, you can make sure that it is also inserted into the student table or into the teacher table. But in the database, this is not guaranteed, right? Let's say this happens. In that case, we display this message. We actually don't expect to come to this part, but maybe while creating the database on SQL Studio, maybe you created the user but you forgot to add it to the student table or to the teachers table. Or maybe in the application's code there is some problem. You forgot to insert the student into the student table, for example. For such cases, this is going to give us an information, and you might go to that part and fix it. But then if we can find it in the teacher table, then we are going to conclude this is a teacher account. We set the user type, we close this window, we open the window for a teacher. So now for the enroll button, so whenever we log in as a student, we display the courses of that student and we are able to enroll into a new course. So the available course comes from here. If it is empty, if we did not choose it, then we need to choose a course first. And then given that we chose a course, we get the course code of it and we just insert it into the enroll table. Right? Whenever a student is enrolled into a course, we need to keep its value in the enroll table. And the values that we insert are going to be the new course code. So this is the course code in the enroll table. And also, we also need the SID, right? We just pass the login user's ID as this second parameter because we are enrolling into that course. So whatever login user ID have there at this position, so whenever I call this function, I'm guaranteed to be a student account and my ID is going to be in this global variable. And for the grades, we at the beginning insert a null value because we did not have the grade at the beginning. We display the message, but then for some scenarios, we need to still update some values on our page. For example, whenever I log in as a student and then enroll into a course, on the same page I also display my courses. So because of that, I should be refreshing those courses because I am enrolled into another course. So this is actually doing that. I need to refresh the courses, and to do a refresh, it's actually very similar to the code that we do at the beginning. So if we look at the window enroll, while creating this window for the student, we find out the courses that are enrolled by this student, and in here we do the same thing. So this is actually the exact same SQL code. We fill the list, so we initialize the list to an empty list, and then we append all the courses that we are enrolled into, and then we need to update the corresponding element in our window. So the key for that item was called available courses. So actually, sorry, this was for updating the available courses. This was for showing our courses. So we show our courses in this part, we update it, and this is the one that shows the available courses that we can enroll into, and we refresh that item using the update code as well. So one thing to be careful, if it is an input, we update the value. If it's a combo or a list box, we update the values. So that's one thing. And in the case of combo or list box, we give a list of items to there. So this is the button for listing the students. So for a teacher, whenever we choose a course, we list the students that are taking that course. So the required fields should not be empty. Given that they are not empty, we find the students. So the student with advisor, we wanted to display their names as well. We wanted to make sure that they are students, so we have the student table here as well. And we also contain the information about which student is enrolled into which course. That's in the enrolled table. We also have the enrolled table. We join these tables, and for the course code, that should be equal to the course code that is selected by this user. So for such courses, we append them to our students list, and we refresh the item that's inside the window. So in here, what we are doing is accessing the window. Since we are not setting the Windows value into something else, that's going to use the global variable for the window. So for example, if I had something like this, window equals to something, then I need to say that I'm using the global version of the window. But since I'm not setting it to some other value, I don't need to explicitly say that this is the global variable. It's going to automatically use the global variables, global version of the window. So the button insert, this is used for inserting a new student. And in here as well, we have like some new things. So we just get the attributes from inputs. We check whether some of them are empty or not. Scholarship should be numeric, etc. It should be positive, not negative, for example. And then for deciding the next available ID, what we do is we find the maximum ID from the user table. So we have two different kinds of users, right? Students and teachers. I'm inserting a student, but since the ID is common in user, for example, let's say that I have user 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, 2 is a student, 3, 4 is a teacher, let's say. The next student that I insert should have the ID 5, right? Because ID 3 and 4 are already used by a teacher. So students and teachers have actually the same parents. So therefore, while inserting a new one, I should first insert it to the parent table. And because of that, I need to find the maximum ID from the parent table. So not from the student table. So that's one difference, because if I just look at the student table and find the maximum incremented by 1, then that's not guaranteed that whether there is a user with the same ID or not. But if I look at the maximum of the user table incremented by 1, then this new ID, I'm sure that it is not in the user table. This is a valid ID for a new user. Then we generate some random password. So in here, actually, if we have no users in the database, then it's going to be not returning anything. In that case, we set the new ID to be equal to 1. But we actually don't expect to come to this part of the code as well, because we are already logged in as a teacher. So we should have some teacher user there in the database. But like if something goes wrong, for example, let's say we by mistake deleted all the users, then we are into this part. Maybe in this part we can display a message saying that, okay, this is the first user we are ever inserting, etc. So this code is for generating some random password. So for a string, we use the join function. So for the empty string, we join a bunch of characters, and those characters are going to be some random choices from this given string. So it's going to choose one character from the string 5 times. So whatever you have as a range there, it's going to be like the number of characters you have in your generated string, and they will be selected from this given string. So this could be whole set of characters as well, but to keep it simple, we decided to have a small subset of letters or characters there. So this is our new password, we generated it. Then we are going to insert it to the user and the student tables. So these two we should do together, right? So we have like queries one after the other doing that task. We first insert it to the user table, that's the parent. So we need to insert it to the user table first. We have our new ID, name, surname, and the new password. So all these variables, we pass it to our query. And we are also inserting this data to the student with advisor table. And this is going to be for the same new ID, right? This user, this specific ID is a new student. We use that same new ID, and we enter the scholarship value, and we also assign the current teacher user as the advisor of the student. So while merging the student table with the advisor table, we were sure that for each student there is going to be an advisor teacher. So while inserting a new student, our scenario said that this teacher that we currently logged in as should be the advisor of this new inserted student. So therefore we passed the login user ID for the value of that instructor TID. Then at the end we display the success message, we clear the input fields so that, for example, if the user is going to create a new student, then these will be empty and can be like, we can write the new values for that. So we have a button for updating the grade. So we get the course, student, and the grade. So these are all from the window. And those should be non-empty. The grade should be between this 0 and 100 range, for example. So the order of checks should also, like you should also be careful about those. So in here we first check whether the grade is empty or not. If it is not empty, then we can check whether it is numeric or not. So if you were to check if it is numeric or not first, then if it is empty, that's going to cause a problem. So you should be like careful about the ordering. Given that it's numeric, I'm able to convert it into an integer. If it was not numeric and if I'm trying to convert it to an integer, then it's going to crash, right? So to not get a crash or an exception, we first check whether it's null or not, then check whether it's numeric or not, then convert it to an integer, and then check as an integer whether it's in the correct range or not. So given that all these are correct, we will be able to update the grade. So for the given course code and the student ID, so the difference here is that the course is selected from a combo, the student is selected from a list box. So for the list box, I need to like have an additional 0 indexing. I get the values and I update this grade for the enroll table. In the enroll table, I set the grade to be equal to the new grade that I enter for the current this SID student and this course code. So these values, before executing the query, I gather those values and then I execute some query. So this is like the approach we have most of the time. We get some values from the user. So those values could come from input fields directly. Maybe user types something, or maybe user chooses something among the list box that we display, or using a combo. User chooses something, but in the end what we get is a bunch of values, and we would like to run some query with those values. We sometimes get some results, show it to the user, or sometimes maybe it's an update query. We say, okay, successfully updated the grade for this student. And sometimes we need to still update or refresh some items that we currently have in the window. For example, whenever we update the grade of that student, since that student's grade is still listed on the screen, we actually need to update that list. And how we update that list is very similar to the beginning what we have. So for example, in the beginning, while showing all these students, actually we show those students whenever we click on the list students button. So these lines are actually exactly the same with these. So that is how we update that list. We can actually have a separate function for that as well. So maybe in the group, for example, one member could work on displaying such values. I can say, okay, so you will have the course code as a parameter, and I want you to write a function to gather the students that are taking this course code. So I want you to display the name, surname, grade, and the ID of that student. And you are going to put these values into a list box with the key student, for example. This can be a function because I'm using it in multiple places. Then I'm going to just call that function, for example, update student list, etc. So to reduce some complexity and to divide the work, you can do such things. So we already looked into showing and sending messages, and that's our code, right? So I'm also going to show one more thing. So in the case that we click on a return to main button, if you look at, we actually have, so if I log in as a teacher, whenever I go into one window, I have the return to main button. In the message window, I have the return to main button. So I'm using the same button name throughout. So for the students as well, I have the same button name. And because of that, according to the user type, I need to decide. So whenever I click on the return to main button, if I logged in as a teacher account, I need to open the menu for the teacher. If this is a student account, I need to open the menu for a student. So that's the distinction. So in here we said that, okay, whenever we go back, we should go back into the correct part, right? And we are keeping that information using the login user type. And according to the login user type, since this is the global variable, I can check it at any part and say that, okay, this is a student, and returning back for a student means that we should return back to this student's homepage, for example. And in the case that we log out, we set this global variables to their default values. For example, there is no user with ID -1. Therefore, to say that I logged out, I'm just keeping the default values, the non-meaningful values there. So for example, if something wrong happens, I don't have the login user ID in the variable still. And in the case that we close the program, we close the last window and we commit our changes. So the connection commit function can appear in multiple places. So for this code, it's at the last part, right? We commit the changes at the last part because we are actually kind of testing this database. If something crashes, maybe by mistake I write a code that deletes all my data, and in such cases I actually don't want to commit. So actually, while testing, you might have no commit function at all. But then if this was a real application, then actually whenever we insert something successfully, we would like to commit. For example, in here I inserted something, the message is successfully sent, then I can commit. So in the succeed parts, in the successful, after successful queries, we can commit. And if something can fail, for example, let me look at the part that we insert a new student. So in here we are inserting a new student, right? And succeeding here means that we insert it into the user table and into the student table as well. So if I were to commit after inserting the user, and maybe this because of some reason fails, then I will have some user but not a student. So let's say I have the commit code in two places, right? I insert the user and commit, I insert the student table and commit. And in such cases, if this succeeds and the second one fails, actually I'm going to have a user which should be a student, but that user's ID is not going to be in the student table. So for such cases, so I should only commit whenever the success happens, right? So I'm inserting this student and into the student table as well. I'm inserting this user's ID, then I can commit. So in which areas that we commit is going to be like important in the real application. But in the project, actually, if we are not going to get any exceptions during the run, then we can keep it at the last place as well. So whenever we close the whole application, we commit our changes. Remember, while our connection is on, actually the changes that we do in the database are still there. But whenever we close the connection, if we did not commit our changes, they will be gone. So for example, let's say I'm inserting a bunch of students and then my program crashes. If I did not commit, then I will lose all my data, like all the changes. But if I'm committing after every student, then if my program crashes, then I'm not going to lose the ones that I correctly inserted. So that's something about the commit changes. So while you are testing, you may omit it sometimes, but if you are using it to like insert some new students, and if you are not sure whether there is going to be like a problem or not, maybe you forgot to add some little aspect of the code in some position, maybe whenever you try to insert a new student, it's going to crash. Then if the students that you previously inserted are important, then you should, like, after the success message here, for example, in inserting the student, after the success message, you should commit. So you want to like keep your new students there. So any questions, problems? So a reminder, so our stages, we will have time for each of these stages, and like for the implementation stage 1, you create the database, and for implementation stage 2 and the final demo, you are going to like implement your scenarios, and they are going to be very similar to what we have in this lab 6 code. And actually these implementation stage labs were there for you to show your stages during the lab, but actually in the online case they are not that manageable, and since Mohammed is not available in both of our lab hours, and Mohammed is involved in the grading as well, we are not going to have these 2 labs. Instead, for implementation stage 1, you are going to just upload your database file. So we are going to announce the assignment after Mohammed completes the grading and feedback of design stage 2. Then for implementation stage 2, you are going to record a short recording, video recording, while you follow the scenario that you choose. So you are going to choose one scenario for implementation stage 2. You are going to implement it in Python using PySimple GUI as well. So you should have some graphical user interface. And since, let's say, for example, whenever I run this code, right, if I did not implement this application, I'm not sure about the functionality. For example, what happens if I keep all the values empty and try to log in? In my version, it gives the error message, but in some application, this might crash. And I need to know some available users, right? For this scenario, for example, I need to log in as a teacher. I need to have this information at some place. You are going to showcase it for some users. And like, if you do it, it's better, right? If we are testing it, it's we might miss some places. Maybe, for example, in here, maybe whenever you do not write the message, you give some error message, which is a good thing. It's contributing to the user friendliness of the program. But if we are trying it, we might miss such things. So that's why we want you to record a video of it, of your screen. Otherwise, we were doing it like with you are coming to the lab, but because of the reasons that I previously said, it's not going to be possible. So you should like we are going to make the announcements for the assignments. So any questions, problems? If not, that's going to be end for our labs. And all our recordings are on the website, so like if you need to refer back to any of our labs, they are there. For all the material is also there, and like the libraries that we are using are kind of common, so if you encounter a problem, you can do a web search about it as well. So if you don't have any questions, that's it for this lab. So see you later then.